Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational Next Economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. So Edgar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yeah. Edgar, why don't we start, folks, I encourage folks to go back and listen to the episode that you did with us in November 2018. But just so folks know, maybe just a brief, background of sort of the work you do and the sort of a brief overview of the Decolonizing Wealth book and message, and we can sort of go from there.
Sure. So I think I wear a number of hats, but I think what I'm ultimately about through all of my work is moving resources, specifically money, into communities of color. I do that through my job at the Schott Foundation. We are a grant maker that funds racial and economic justice, kind of as it pertains to education issues. I do that through my board service, groups that I'm affiliated with. And with this book that I wrote, so Decolonizing Wealth for me, which it's been crazy that it's been almost a year since it came out last October. For me, I think of this body of work as a love letter to philanthropy in a lot of ways. Philanthropy is so problematic, and the book outlines all the dysfunctionality and the complicated, reality that philanthropy actually is. But it is an industry that I love, and I have had a very rewarding career for the past 15 years being a grant maker. But I felt in this book that we have reached a time in the social sector and just be in life in general that we're having conversations about equity, conversations about social change that had really only hit the surface for me, and we're not really addressing the underlying dynamics at play for what really needs to change in the world to really move the needle on dismantling white supremacy, particularly in the realms of philanthropy and social finance. And as someone who is indigenous, a person of color, coming from a family that in poverty, and finding myself working inside of these institutions with a lot of wealth and a lot of privilege, I held a lot of contradictions, and I saw a lot of disparities between the explicit mission of these organizations and where resources were actually going and who was really holding power. That caused me to really question myself and my own leadership and my own values at times, and asking myself what I really had to give up of myself in order to really lead in that type of white dominant space. And so this book really calls out what I think of as colonial dynamics that are a part of our history in this country, that are pervasive in every aspect of our policies and systems and organizations in a way that becomes so normalized for us because this is just the way it is, the way that we live. But I think that a lot of the problems we're seeing in our country today, with just horrific acts of white supremacy and the tension and the polarization in communities right now is a product of us not addressing a history of colonization and slavery in this country. And so I talk about that history and what I think it's required of us in order to heal and to move forward, and then how we as a philanthropic or charitable or social finance industry, what role that we can play in really dismantling and those harmful dynamics and really showing up and helping to facilitate healing in our communities by using money and wealth in a different way.
And can you contrast your message maybe to when your book first came out? How was it received versus maybe now? Like, are people more familiar and more open to it? Or like, what's sort of been your experience of your message over the last year?
Yeah, I guess when you write a book, I was kind of prepped by my publisher to have zero expectation that anyone would read the book, because I'm sure lots of books come out, people are hopeful, and they just don't.
I have the same publisher, so I know
that. Right.
No one will read your book.
Right, exactly. So very low expectations. I figured in my book that, some family members or friends might read it. I also knew that I was writing some provocative stuff that would maybe cause a little bit of a ripple within the sector, but I really had no imagination that the book would take off to the level that it has, and that it would sort of just reach far and wide. Even today, someone showed me a photograph. They were on the train in New York City, and some, random person was reading my book and holding it. So I never get tired of those messages. It's like, I'm just amazed that people who are not connected to me and not even connected to this industry of philanthropy per se would find this book and really resonate with its message. I would say that early on, the choir for this book definitely was the philanthropic industry, where I've been for 15 years. It's a relatively small space where a lot of us know each other. And if you put in 15 years, you kind of, people are going to know who you are. And it's just so rare that anyone puts out anything that's provocative at all, right? It's we have a very nice culture where we all assume that we're good people doing good work, and we sort of turn our heads towards problems that we may see because we just don't want to be the troublemakers in this field. And so to come out with a book that actually brings some of these issues to the main stage for a conversation was a little bit, shaking for a lot of folks. But I didn't feel any pushback or blowback. And I'll be honest, I was at times a little afraid and questioned myself before the book came out. Am I doing the right thing? What's going to happen? Am I going to be blacklisted and never get a job again? And I just decided that, what, this is my story. I've got to have, it is my reality and my truth, and I'm going to move forward with it. And so I will say that the response in the beginning was like very supportive from the field. And what's changed over the past year is that this message has really reached a more broader audience. Started in like grant making, then it was like the impact investing folks and finance and banks and credit unions. So it began to kind of ripple out in the space where money is kind of a part of the business, to now places in like corporate America and the entertainment industry, which has been quite interesting, where folks are really resonating with the message of healing and coming together and having truth and reconciliation. I think we're just at a point, especially in this country, where folks are looking for a message that is about, bringing us back together as a community and finding a path forward through all of this darkness. And the book and the sort of the message that I'm out there evangelizing about really speaks to that desire that I think people have right now.
Yeah, and it seems to me that your message, and we spoke, I think, last time about Anand Giridharadas' book, The Winners Take All. It seems like Trump and the political climate have made it people like way more receptive to that message. Like you're kind of like, things are broken. And if it's Obama, maybe people are like, well, there's some problems, but now it's like, holy shit, the house is on fire. What is going on?
Timing is everything. And I will say I've had so many folks reach out to me who want to write a book or interested in writing a book and want to get advice. And I've been thinking about posting some YouTube video, just kind of share my experience because one, there's just so many people are interested. But it's challenging because a lot of it is about timing. And had my book come out, 2 years ago, I don't know if it would have had quite the same impact. And those are things that we just can't quite account for, right? You write a book, it comes out when it comes out. And who knew that, at the time when I was writing my book, there were very little conversations in mainstream media about reparations, about colonization, about healing, honestly, and sort of restoring balance.
White supremacy too.
White supremacy, was sort of still kind of a provocative word in itself. And right before the book came out, I always kind of joke around, the movie Black Panther came out, right? Which I think is a great movie. And sort of the word colonization became a part of like pop culture lingo. And you saw the memes with the young woman, the actress in the movie saying, I forget exactly what she said, something like "not today, colonizer" or whatever. So it just, even like the word colonizer, the term decolonization, I think with that movie went from being sort of a frame that was used in some justice, progressive circles of thinking about racial justice to really seeing on a big screen sort of like the impacts of colonization on a society, right? So of course, that happened, and then sort of what we're living with and seeing just very explicit acts of colonization in real time with, what's happening at the border, and we're putting children in cages and separating families, all of these horrific acts of colonization that have and many, they've been happening, but they're just so, it's on the evening news every night in our faces. And so the book coming out right at this time was just tremendous. And it hit at a time where the world was looking for language to describe sort of what they might be feeling or what's happening in the country.
Yeah, and I think that wealth, maybe one reason it's been so popular is wealth. A lot of folks know that wealth drives a lot of that behavior, all this, and the accumulation of it. And so I think you nailed it. If folks are receptive to the message, what's been your experience of people actually changing though? Because people might be like, yeah, that's great, but we're not going to do anything.
That's been like one of the most tremendous, there's so many great things. Every single day I come home and I feel like I have like 5 exciting announcements to share with my partner, who must be exhausted by now. But, I think that the fact that there are very tangible changes that I've been recording that people have shared with me are really important. So some that are a little bit more superficial and funny that I'll share. As a result of this book, people have told me that their marriage has been saved. One woman who was in a terrible work situation and I guess showing up at home in a way that was tearing her family apart, as a result decided to quit her job, and she's happy now and she's a new person, and her marriage has been saved. There's an engagement that happened as a result of this book at an event that I had in New Orleans where I invited 2 separate people from 2 parts of the country to this event for different reasons, met there, began dating, and I just got a text message from the woman last week that they are engaged, and they're so thankful to me and to this book for bringing them together. So those are, that wasn't the impact necessarily that I was looking for in writing this book, but I love those stories. But I will say, beyond, I was in philanthropy. I think we often get caught up in intellectual conversations and really paralyzed sometimes by trying to operationalize sort of complex ideas that we're talking about. Like, how do you dismantle white supremacy in a space? It seems like a daunting task. But I will say that I have numerous examples of foundations, who are not only reading the book, like at the board level, at the staff level, and having real deep conversations and dives into the book. But there are several foundations who have began real journeys of inside their foundations to take the book and literally side by side their strategic plan, say, how can we actually decolonize how we're doing our work? The California Endowment, that's in Oakland and Los Angeles, is one of those foundations. I met with the board. They have an internal DEI committee. And they shared actually earlier this week a template where they are looking at their board, like every aspect of their operations, and asking questions around how they can decolonize, with quotes from the book and like different ideas from the book alongside as a part of this document. I know other large foundations like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I've been in consultation with them and thinking about how they show up differently in the world, and they want to convene a group of indigenous leaders to really speak to them about how they can repair relationship with indigenous communities, how they can show up and be in right relationship. And so that's some conversations I'm having and helping to convene those folks. And hopefully later next year, we'll put out, some findings from those conversations. What is it beyond just Edgar? Like, there's lots of Native folks in this country who have interacted with financial institutions and foundations and have kind of felt burned. And so what do we have to offer in terms of what we expect or ask of allies who want to invest in our communities? So that's, those are just like a few examples. One of the most surprising example, I was in Toronto, and a foundation there, I met a CEO who said, that part in your book where you say foundations should just take 10% of their corpus and just hand it over to communities of color? I said, yeah. He said, we're actually doing that. And I was like, what?
Wow. That's amazing.
Not that I think that, I believe it's possible to do all of the things that I put out there in the book, but some of the ideas were really just to push our thinking. And, I don't have the step-by-step process of how to operationalize, all of the ideas in the book, but this is a foundation who really took that value to heart, that grant making alone is not going to be transformative enough. It's not going to close the race wealth gap. We need to look at all of the money, including the money that we have tied up in investments, and think about how we can use those resources in a way that help to facilitate healing. And so he said, yeah, we've decided we are taking 10% of that money and we're going to hand it over to First Nations people in our community. How, I don't know the details. I want to follow up and find out how they're doing that. But, so there have been, folks who are really, really thinking about how to operationalize. I have, there's a course at a university in Portland where an entire semester you can study this book. So people have taken this book and really are diving deeper and are creating their own frameworks and ways to think about operationalizing the book and their work. And I'm really, really honored that it's making that impact.
That's huge. Yeah, giving 10% away just like that. I know that's a lot of foundations, probably that freaks them out even hearing that, but it's what needs to happen. And so let's talk about where you see this going. We mentioned, the book is about a year old. And so what are some of the emergent stuff you're starting to see? Is it like, new revolutionary forms of giving, or just be curious what you see on the horizon.
Sure. So, I'm wondering if things are ever going to slow down. For me, it doesn't feel like it. So I know personally I'm going to continue to engage in conversations in places where I feel like, the halls of power where I can get into and speak truth. I'll continue to do that. I've been really listening over the past year to what people have expressed they need. And I think for a lot of folks, this book has sort of awakened them or provoked them to want to take action. And people are stumbling over, in some cases, how do we actually do this? Like, people are like, they're like, Edgar, can you come to our foundation? Can you meet with our board? How do we actually do this? We need to be spoon fed. And so I've been thinking through what's the best way to support a process to help people, put it into action. So we are in the process of building a workshop curriculum around the book. We hope to have that out by the end of the year. That will be, a half day or a full day experience where we take the framework in the book and we really support funders and investors in thinking through how to, practically apply the framework to their work. We're also looking at, building out institutes around the book where this might be a 2-day or maybe a 3-day experience for folks who really want an intensive experience. It's hard in a half day to take people into a deep transformative healing situation. And I know that for a board of a foundation, for example, that might want to dig a little bit deeper, they're not gonna, go but so far in a half day. So how can we sort of create an appetite to get people on a lifelong journey, but also leave there with very practical steps for them to operationalize to begin moving money? An institute would be an opportunity for folks to really begin to unpack and shed some of the colonial ways of thinking and showing up. And so I'm really excited to think through what that might look like. And I think within, a 3-day experience that's designed in the right way, that it could really be super transformative for leaders. So those are a couple of things. We're also looking at online curriculum in the space of philanthropy. I think most folks are interested in sort of workshops and having someone there to facilitate. But outside of philanthropy in corporate America settings, what I've learned from folks is that online curriculum is sort of a big way to get information out. So we're looking at putting together a 10-part series where there'll be sort of a session on each of the steps to healing in the book that folks can download and sort of, at their own pace, dig much deeper into the experience of the book. So we are looking at tools and resources to accompany the book. Hopefully in the next month or so on the website, we'll have a free toolkit that folks can download that just has discussion questions, sample book club questions. So we're looking at all the things that people have asked for and, some things that folks have already created that are just open source, accompanying documents or tools for the book. 2 other things I'll share that are really exciting. I could kind of go on and on about it. There's a lot happening. I know that from the book, there's lots of people who are in pain, right? I travel around the country and the world, and wherever I'm signing books, there are people who always come up just tears streaming. Like people are literally holding a lot in these institutions, and especially people of color, Indigenous folks who may be the only person in their institutions. And so I've been thinking a lot about what I could do to support healing and support, bring some support to folks like that. There are, healing justice and healing is a big thing happening in social movements right now. Is there a way to bring some of that into these spaces where we're working as organizers inside of these white dominant kinds of institutions? So I'm really excited. I got some seed funding to begin sort of a healing circle, bringing together some thought leaders who are people of color who are, kind of inside pushing from the inside out to provide some support. Because we also, even though, we're people of color, Indigenous folks, we have to be so cautious to not internalize white supremacy and to actually perpetuate those dynamics. Although we're not white, right? It doesn't matter. White supremacy is something that we all can internalize and become a part of the problem versus a part of the solution. So I'm looking at how I can support, people of color in the space in that way. And then, Ryan, the last thing I'll share, sorry, I'm going on and on. I get so excited about all of this stuff. We are looking to launch a fund. Hopefully by mid-September, we have a big event in LA where we want to sort of officially announce. But we're looking at a fund that is in some ways sort of like the Giving Circle model. That will be a fund that is for Indigenous people, by Indigenous people, where we actually come together as a Native community to pool resources to support work in our communities. The Giving Circle model is something that you see happening in a lot of communities. There are, groups of women, groups of other people of color, and we don't have a national Giving Circle for Native folks in this country. So my goal is to kind of create a space for us to come together as a community to give money. We often give in non-traditional ways, but we also do move money, and I'm looking to create a platform to do that. And we are going to invite non-Native allies to be a part of this as well, sort of with a reparations frame. And so if anyone wants to give and donate, they can definitely be a part of this circle. However, we're going to protect and privilege the sovereignty of the Indigenous folks in the circle to decide how and where the resources are deployed. And so it creates an opportunity for us to come together across class, across race, but also provides an opportunity for Indigenous folks to demonstrate a way of grant making or giving that is really true to our worldview.
I love that. I'm super excited because we definitely don't have something like that. And I really appreciate this sort of boundary because it's sort of like the critique of, I'm a white guy and I want to donate 5 million to your Giving Circle, but I want to be on the board and like be the CEO or something like that. It's like I can see us white folks like to be involved in like the giving and the it's problematic. And so the fund, is it going to be a nonprofit that you sort of resource and then it gives out grants, or is it going to be investment at all, or what's sort of or maybe it's still in process to think
That's
about
a good question. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I am going to start with sort of just nonprofits moving money, a nonprofit organization that is moving. We have a fiscal sponsor as a C3, the Decolonizing Wealth project as it sits. And we are looking to, create that tax write-off for people who want to give. And we will most likely fund, in our current position, we're able to fund, give money to nonprofits and individuals. So I'm putting together an advisory group who will kind of work out those nuances of exactly where and how the money will go. But I've explored this question recently around, is this a fund that will just really give money to folks versus an impact investing fund that will invest and sort of expect something back? It could potentially grow to be, a different type of, giving or investment product. But ultimately, where I've sort of been landing lately is that I'm interested in getting money to people and closing the race wealth gap in that way with no expectation of a return. And so I want to create a product that allows folks with wealth to give their wealth away with no strings attached, no expectation of a return, to a place that is trusted and where they are going to be happy to understand and know that a group of Indigenous people are going to steward those resources into our communities in a way that really addresses needs in the way that we see our priorities in our communities. And so I'm leaning toward sort of a grant making product right now and not impact investing, which I think impact investing is fantastic in a lot of ways, and is a good thing in general. I could speak to some critiques, but I am interested in just moving resources and closing a gap that has been put there because of our history and institutionalized racism, and with no expectation of a return on that investment.
One sort of coming bit around to like the problems with philanthropy that you're trying to address. If I were to circle back, how do your conversations go around tax justice and sort of like the how the money was made in the first place. 'Cause it's sort of like when it gets to philanthropy, it's already been extracted, right? So how do you have that conversation around like, okay, how are you making the money in the first place that even gets to be distributed? And then also, what are you doing also to make sure that your money isn't just sitting in DAFs or, Bermuda tax-free havens, or I'm kind of curious how you have those conversations, if at all.
Yeah, I mean, that comes up probably at every talk, and sort of my thinking in response to that, it's sort of a both and, right? And so this is where sort of indigenous thinking and that I share in the book comes into play, because it's not so, everything's not so absolute. I think so. Yes, I think that we have to be honest about the source of wealth in this country, and that's part of me is not to reduce it down to like it is what it is. But if we can actually just have institutions and individuals to admit that it is what it is and how wealth was earned, and to bring that understanding of history into their current work and their grant making or investing strategies, then that would be a huge step forward. We can't go back and change how wealth was accumulated in many cases in this country, especially sort of legacy wealth. But we can be honest about the source of it. So I think it's really hypocritical for us in philanthropy to show up with a checkbook like we are, angels that have descended from heaven, and there was no history of this wealth before we arrived on the scene with this foundation. And I know there's some work happening in Canada where my friends who work at the Circle there, which is a group of a network of foundations that are indigenous-led foundations, but also they call them settler-based or settler-led foundations. They are actually doing some studies with some foundations to look at the origins of their wealth, and not necessarily just the industry where the wealth came from, but what are the sort of ripple impacts of harm that may have been caused? Who are the low-wage workers and families that were exploited, perhaps, in the history of accumulating that wealth? And is there a way that through the grant-making present day, we can sort of right some of those wrongs? So I think that just being aware and honest about the source of wealth and how it came to be is a starting place. And there's no way for us, especially if we weren't even born yet when this wealth was accumulated, there's no way for us to go back and like really erase a lot of that. But what we can do is just, one, do the work to understand the history and try our best with the resources now to right the wrongs. I think that we all should be doing that, whether we're a foundation or even in our own personal families, and what is our own story of money and how money impacts our lives. And it's something that is just, we make choices every single day with how we use money that we can either perpetuate or continue to harm, or we can make choices to help close gaps and move resources more into communities that have been marginalized. So that's sort of, one thing. And then, of course, I always say that I think that, wealthy folks paying taxes is probably the best thing that could happen. There was a report that came out recently that giving was down in the U.S. And, one I guess, critic of mine out there tweeted something that said this was because of me and my book, and I'm, and Anon and our critiques of philanthropy have gone too far and we're causing people not to give. And my first sort of crass response to that was like, well, then if they don't want to give, they can pay taxes. I don't care. It's probably better anyway. And so, yes, I think that wealthy people should pay taxes. And I think that we should all be working towards a world where philanthropy as it currently exists does not exist, and that we are all paying our fair share to have the resources in the communities so that we all have the potential to thrive in the most communal way possible. And so, yeah, that's why, philanthropy in itself is very problematic, because it is a byproduct of this, capitalistic system.
We're speaking the week after El Paso, mass shooting, Dayton, mass shooting, 10 days ago or so was Gilroy, near where I am. And I've been thinking about writing an article, which is around this idea that, overt and violent white supremacy, racist white supremacy is the most shocking, but it's unconscious and unintentional white supremacy from folks like me, or just progressive people, or basically people who are in foundations who are just sort of like unaware of legacies of colonialism, enslavement, Native American genocide. It's us who are actually causing the most harm for people of color, and actually for white people, because some would argue that the whole opioid crisis is this white sort of our identity, our sort of like belief in like what we should be to where we are is like so just like disparate that we're like actually killing ourselves from opiates. And we're killing the planet, which affects us. So white supremacy, the unconscious and unintentional kind, I've been wanting to write something about like how that's actually more harmful, but I wanted to check. Does that resonate with you, or am I like off base at all?
No, it is. And it's so easy. I mean, like the memes and all the posting on social media, where when there's an incident of violence and then how we respond, there's the thoughts and prayers, and there's the social media rants, and then we kind of forget about it, and there's no policy changes around gun control, and then we just see this cycle are so real, because it's I think in many cases when these incidents happen, they're so horrific, and we turn to a particular perpetrator, and we start assigning blame. But the truth is, so many folks like don't know what to do, and it is those deeper underlying problems in our society around race and white supremacy that keep festering, that have been unattended, that are creating the conditions for this stuff to happen. And even like, yesterday I was ranting and venting to someone about Donald Trump, and maybe all of this will wake folks up and we'll get him out of office. And and this person graciously reminded me that, yeah, that could happen. But, Donald Trump, it just represents, an army of people in this country who have, who share, that, those values. And that's really the scary, like, that's a lot more scarier than Donald Trump himself. So no, I resonate with what you're saying. And I think, it is, it's going to take all of us, not just the progressive, not just people of color, but all of us to find a way to really come together to see that the common enemy is white supremacy. And I love how you stated that it's actually harming white people. And I think that when more people understand that, they'll join the struggle. That's been another surprise of my book, I would say, is that the section where I talk about how white supremacy is harming white people, and perhaps in different ways than it has historically harmed people of color. But we all have this pain that we're living with because of subscribing to this false ideology of whiteness, and it's really tearing us apart. When people begin to see that. And buy into that and see the harm it's causing themselves, I think we'll be able to, grow this movement for racial justice in a real way.
On another tangent off of that, I read this book a few months ago called My Grandmother's Hands. I don't know if you've heard of that book. It's all about like somatic trauma, and like he talks about how white folks for millennia used to torture and kill each other in Europe, like put each other on racks and like burn with like hot irons and like, just basically like torture and murder and like kill each other. And then, so we have all this like collective white trauma from just like destroying each other in Europe. And then the people who fled to come colonize the United States were actually sort of like fleeing all that violence, but all that unprocessed sort of like white trauma was brought to America and then perpetuated with against Native Americans and later enslaved Africans. And it was really interesting because his approach was, we need to like both like intellectually understand history, but also like do like the somatic work within our own bodies, both white, Black, other people of color, but like sort of that somatic trauma healing, which can't really be accessed by our consciousness. Anyways, it was just, it's one layer of the conversation I don't think we're necessarily having. At least, I won't speak in we statements, I'll speak in I statements. I haven't been having that conversation for how I talk about it. So that was sort of transformative for me.
No, that is powerful. I've heard, now that you shared that, I have heard about that. I've heard people sort of describe that colonization was sort of perfected between Europeans before it was exported to the US or whatever. But you're right. I will say where that aligns with an indigenous worldview is sort of the value of the 7 generations, where we know and understand that trauma is passed down for 7 generations. And so, we're inheriting in our bodies, literally the trauma from what has happened. And for my community, we've had, there's trauma that's happening on a daily basis, but we've had, significant trauma, as recent as my grandmother's age, where folks were, kids were taken away from their families and put in Indian boarding schools. So that's something that I know for generations to come, despite all of my best efforts to be an agent for change and promote healing. I know that the next generations of my family are going to be inheriting that trauma. And so it's so important that our philanthropy be trauma informed, that our, healthcare system be trauma informed, our public education system. And ultimately, I think that's what healing is, just so important. And if we can understand these histories that we all share, we're going to be just a lot more gracious towards one another. And it's something I try to remind myself. I live in New York City, so it's just so easy to be an angry person. And I just, on a daily basis when I'm on the subway, I try to remind myself that, I don't know what someone might be going through on this particular day or what they're carrying. There's a lot of pain in the world beyond what we're seeing on the national level, just in our individual families, things are happening. So we're going to be better people if we can just hold that value, that all my relations, right?
New York City is definitely a good test of your equanimity, right?
Right.
So as we move in the last couple of minutes, what do you need right now, and how can the listeners help you grow this next economy in the Decolonizing Wealth movement?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. A couple of easy things, and then, of course, I'll put out something for someone who may be listening and is really moved. Anyone who has read the book and appreciates the book, a simple Amazon review would be helpful. And I know how some of us feel about Amazon, but they ultimately control the book industry. And Amazon reviews really mean things. And so for someone, I'm a first-time author, having those Amazon reviews, even if you didn't buy the book at Amazon, because I absolutely support local bookstores, you can go there to leave a review, share about the book on social media, go to decolonizingwealth.com and join our mailing list. Those are very easy things that you all can do to sort of keep the book, being talked about. We have a book club. Read this book with your family, read it with your friends, have a discussion about it. We're going to be posting discussion questions on the website shortly if you need guidance in that area. And then, more broadly, what I would say to support the Decolonizing Wealth project, I shared with you, Ryan, sort of how we're building out, wanting to create more tools and to help facilitate these conversations and help facilitate action. We're wanting to launch this fund. So we're desperately, eagerly looking for investors who are willing to support this work. Again, you can go to decolonizingwealth.com to make a contribution, or you can reach out to me personally, and we're happy to kind of talk with you about how our vision for rolling this out. We are not creating more busy work for Edgar or for, just to be doing things. But we are responding to what we know is a demand and an appetite for support and resources for people to begin these healing journeys. And ultimately, to move money into communities of color. So That's financial support is really critical as we're looking to sort of, phase out and evolve to this, like next level.
I love it. And did you say there's a launch event coming up in Los Angeles in September? Or?
Yeah, we have so many events. Like on the website, we try to keep that updated, everything happening. We are having an event in Los Angeles. This is a unique event that it's not a public event, but if there are listeners who really want to come, like reach out. But that event is one that we're engaging different folks from the entertainment industry, actually, and some actors and influencers who are using their platforms to advance racial justice. And so we're having a conversation about the power of storytelling and bringing together these industry leaders to really push them to think about representation and the stories and narratives that they are pushing out, and how they could either, perpetuate ideas of white supremacy, or how they might share their resources and power with people of color and indigenous folks to tell our stories. Because ultimately we know that storytelling is a fundamental part of movement building, and so important that we have better representation in that space. So at that event, with that captive audience of folks, we're going to sort of go a little public in our launch of this new fund. And so, yes, September 14, I believe, is a date where you can get more information right on the homepage of our website for the launch of the fund.
Great. And if folks want to see me and Edgar in person, we're going to be at Summit November, I think it's like 8th, 9th, or 10th. I think it's maybe the Sunday, the 10th. So we'll be in LA. That'll be an interesting conference. We'll see how it goes.
Absolutely. We're taking the podcast to the main stage, and
that's right.
Maybe who knows where else after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Traveling tour. Okay, Edgar, thanks so much for being on the show, and really appreciate you and everything you're doing.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate your work.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.